fog means one thing during the winter, and that means the water temp is warmer than the air temp. That means the bass are cold, because bass are cold-blooded creatures. And one of my favorite things to do during this kind of fall to winter transition, really late fall, is kind of find the last of this stuff right here. And it's almost a Florida pattern that I do up here in North Alabama. And really, I'm looking for matted vegetation that's kind of dying off. Maybe it's still a little green, a little like bit of growing and that, but it's almost like a quilt for these bass in the late season. And they go and hide in there for that last little bit of warmth. We all kind of hang out next to the fire or wrap ourselves in a blanket and watch some TV. That's exactly what the bass are doing. I'm also gonna hang out with bogacorn. So if that doesn't get you excited, there's something wrong with you. Hit that like and subscribe button. Make sure to go check out Monster Bass, because anyone that supports the channel, I dig. And let's go fishing. Fish on. That's the kind we're looking for. But that's the deal. Not as big as I was hoping, but not 2 1/4. So as you guys know, I'm the 25 rod guy kind of thing. But when I come out to do this stuff, I'm super simplified. And I know you guys are gonna give me hell because I got a bunch of rods there and I got a couple there. But overall, I got these 2. And that's about it. I will have, so for instance, I got a frog right there. Nice butt fold. Frog right there. I got a chatterbait, no trailer even on it. Got a buzz bait and a topwater bait and a spinner bait. I have those just in case you can kind of see. So there's like a gap here and then it picks up and there's a little mat line. Some of the stuff is chop grass. You'll run into places where there's open spaces or you're hopping between like one dome to another and you want something to throw. It's all about efficiency. The more casts, the more presentations you make, the more likely you are to catch a fish. But overall, the point being is you are committed to this bite. Like you are hopping around, the isolated stuff is the best. So you might even stop on something, make 3 or 4 pitches, and that's it. Like you're done and you're moving on to the next spot. You're not really settling in on a spot unless you get a really long stretch, but keep it simple and you just commit to the bite, because you're not going to get a lot of bites, but the rewards can be awesome. That's a big one, dude. Look at Buck. Look at Buck. Dude, he hit it all the way down at the bottom. That is a beautiful fish, dude. Look at how much grass he's got on him. Just barely ate it, too. Look at Buck. We got a spot lock this thing. Dude, just the solid. That's probably 3 3/4, almost 4 pounds. Just into some of this chop grass stuff. And it's been a grind, boys, but that's what you get. Back you go. So what are some common mistakes people make when they're flipping and punching? You know, the biggest one that I see and I get on my messages is rod choice. So when you're flipping vegetation like this, and even if you're flipping wood and things along those lines, I think a lot of guys have the misconception that you need this super stout, like I'm only gonna catch big fish, like stiff, you know, pool cue of a rod. And that is not the case, especially when it's tough out here, kind of like it is today. You know, these fish don't like knock the bait. Oftentimes you're gonna get kind of what I would describe as like a jig bite or a dead weight bite. And you need some tip in your rod to kind of feel that, because the rod's gonna load up and you're not even gonna know the fish is there. So something that has tip, but at the same time, you're gonna need backbone. You're gonna need a rod that's pretty stout in the back. Now, with all that being said, granted, all of these rods flipping and punching are stiffer rods overall, but the way you can kind of test it is if you put a weight on it, whatever weight you're flipping. Say I have a 711 right here, it's a heavy action. That's the other thing too. A lot of the extra heavies, I'm not a big fan of. I think those are too stiff. But basically, if you take that weight, I got this set up with a 1.5, and if you kind of get on that tip and just kind of pop it a little. If it's got like a decent little amount of play in it, but then it loads up pretty quickly to the backbone, that's probably a good rod setup to run. The other thing too is I would stay away from micro guides. Micro guides on rods tend to, when you're doing this kind of high impact fishing, they tend to strip off. They're super nice for fluorocarbon fishing in that, but when it comes to heavy braid, they just can't handle the pressure, and oftentimes you'll pop rod guides off. The other thing too is you need a reel that can handle the drag being cranked all the way down. This is one of my old Curado 200E Greenie Minis. It is a workhorse, dude. And I have the drag cranked all the way down on this guy. I can always loosen it up, but I'm running 80-pound braid. It's another thing too. We'll come back to the reel, but you want to run heavier line, and heavier than what you think. Especially when you're fishing this vegetation, you'd think like 50-pound or 40-pound will cut it, but really in reality, it's not that you're going to catch like a 20-pound fish or something along those lines. It's that they get stuck in this grass, and the amount that it gets kind of caked up on your bait as well as the fish you're trying to pull in puts a whole bunch of pressure on the actual line. So I'd recommend, if you're doing it in vegetation, 65 is the standard. I like 80 if it's really thick hydrilla. But when it comes to reels, you need a reel that you're not going to fry. You're going to have to spend some money. You're going to have to spend probably upwards of $175 on a decent reel. I'd recommend Shimano. I have no affiliation with Shimano, but I try a bunch of other reels, and I always end up coming back to Shimano. But the thing that you can do to kind of give the reel a little bit of extra life, and I think a lot of guys actually don't do this, it's a big mistake too, is I have braid on here. This is 80-pound braid, but under this, I have a whole bunch of 15-pound mono. Basically what that mono does is it allows a little bit of stretch all the way down so that when you have that drag locked up, you're not actually frying the gears all the time. The other thing that you can do too is this rod is dedicated 100% to flipping and punching. So really, I don't need, 300 yards of braid on here. I can really almost fill the spool up and probably put on maybe 100 yards, 75 yards of braid or so, and then I can change out that braid as I go because the line tends to get nicked up, the weight nicks up the line, things along those lines. So you can always keep fresh line on there, but it's a great economical way to save some money and not use a bunch of line. The other thing too is if you're flipping vegetation, there are a couple exceptions. Maybe if you're flipping around like harder cover or something along those lines, but if you're flipping vegetation, you need a snelled setup. And a snelled setup just means, I'm gonna rip my bait off right here, means when that weight creates pressure on the hook, it kicks the hook up. What I've found is it just means better hookups and more hookups when the fish aren't biting it as well, because really when you're working with braid and no stretch line, all you have to do is put a little bit of pressure on your rod because you're using a pretty stout rod, but you have that good tip on it, and that little bit of pressure just kicks that hook out and you get the hook up. The other mistake I see a lot and hear from guys a lot is I think they look at punching as kind of like worming but with a big weight. And really, that's not the case. It's just like a reaction bite, just like a quick moving bait, chatterbait, rattle trap, things along those lines. So you really want to get in and get out pretty quickly, because the majority of your bites, once again, I'll throw you some exceptions, but the majority of your bites are always going to happen on that fall. So if I'm going down this line and trying to pick apart every single piece, I'm going to probably fish like a quarter mile in one day. I'm not going to cover water very well. And to be perfectly frank, the majority of the time, like I said, these fish are going to react on the downfall. Now, exceptions to that. The exceptions are pretty much when the water gets really cold. Maybe you have a big cold front come through, especially in spring with vegetation. If you have that front go through and those fish are kind of moving up to spawn, they do seem to kind of slow down and get lethargic. In Florida, it's a classic deal, and you got to sit there and kind of pump and yo-yo the bait. But more often than not, when you're doing that, you're actually focused on a more isolated target. Like an example would be like that little point like out there where it sticks out. So you have a smaller target and you're really kind of picking it apart, and really that target should be near like a spawning flat or where those fish are actually kind of going to. All the other months, especially fall, and if you still have grass in winter, it's really a reaction. Those fish are kind of tucked up in there, they're staying warm, they're eating when the sun kind of warms up the grass, but that bait's falling quickly past it. If you think about it, oftentimes that time of year, the baits that you're using to catch fish are more reactive. So it's the same concept, you're just doing it in that vegetation. Another huge mistake that I see is thinking all grass is the same. And I don't mean just types of grass. What I'm basically talking about is grass lines, or the way the grass is set up. When you're doing this punching technique, you need the grass set up so that it's almost like a continual line, or it's clumpy. You can see right down here, we have some pretty thick clumps, but the biggest key with all of them is they're really defined. That defined edge, you're not looking for, and as everything that I say, there's always exceptions, but you're not really looking for sparse grass. You're looking for something that's creating a canopy or really thickening up, even if it's underwater. And a lot of guys will kind of focus on pitching around, flipping around a lot of this strandy stuff, but that edge, just like when you catch bass on like a deep grass line or something along those lines underwater, they're really focused on those harder edges, or those turns that have those harder edges. Lastly, go big or go home. So you guys can see that's a Hogtech tungsten weight. That's a 1.5 ounce weight. Absolutely gigantic, right? I think one of the things, especially guys who are just getting into punching, get spooked about is the weight, or the size of weight that they use. You know, they're used to throwing maybe an 1/8 ounce, a 1/4 ounce shaky head, or maybe a 3/8 is the heaviest they've ever used because they've dragged deep grass lines. But you start talking about 3/4, half, 1 ounce, 1.5, even 2 ounce, 2.5 ounce, like giant weights, and guys get a little weird. You know, you want that bait to fall through pretty clean. There are exceptions. Probably the biggest one is when, you know, you're kind of pumping the bait and being very soft and very deliberate about it, and you're trying to get a super slow fall. Even when you're pitching trees, you're trying to get that bait to fall and glide very gently. But for the most part, as we talked about earlier, this is a reaction bite. You want the weight to be big enough so that you're not sitting there and kind of shaking it to get it through. There's a couple reasons. One, it's a reaction bite, and also two, for efficiency. You're trying to cover water. We talked about earlier, kind of a lot of guys make the mistake of just slowly pumping it up and down on every stretch that they're on during every time of year, and that just slows you way down, and you're not covering water. There very well could be a group of fish 100 yards up that are willing to bite that bait as it drops through, but because you never made it to them, you don't know. So don't be timid about weight size. These fish, you'd be surprised how fast they'll eat a bait going down. The other thing interesting too, if you ever try to do some of this punching technique and you have like a 1 ounce or 1.5 rigged up, pitch it in the water in front of you if the water's pretty clear, and watch how slow it actually falls. It doesn't fall nearly as quick as you would think. It's kind of surprising actually. So really that weight is to get it through, but the fall itself isn't super lightning speed. But don't be afraid to go with a heavier weight. I've actually been schooled in a couple tournaments when I tried to be a little more timid and light about my weight, going to a 1.25, maybe a 1 ounce, and kind of shaking the bait through, when other guys were using heavier weights, and really that rate of fall and their ability to be more efficient ended up taking the bank from me, I guess you could say, because I did not catch them, and those fish were really keyed into that more reactive fall, as well as the fact that they were able to cover water more efficiently. I hope you guys enjoyed this video about punching and flipping. It's one technique that I absolutely love, and it's something that works in fall if you still have grass and you still have just even junky stuff laying around. It doesn't even have to be vegetation. And as we move into spring, for all my Florida peeps, actually all winter, you guys can flip, and punch some mats, and it's fun because those fish are in a continual pre-spawn mode, stacking up, loading up in stuff that looks like this. Everybody give a like and subscribe for Mr. Bog. He's doing the unicorn thing today. What a good pit bull and good fishing partner. We'll see you back in the garage talking fishing, or doing some more of this stuff, trying to catch some big bass, because that's what we do.